Historical German Newspapers in Linguistics. The history of the German newspaper began over 400 years ago. In the year 1609, the first two documented weekly newspapers were published: the Aviso in Wolfenbüttel and the Relation in Strasbourg. Over the following decades, the story of this new medium of publication was a story of success, of growth, and of increasing range throughout the population, and it has lasted until today. That's why in the scientific discourse, early newspapers are regarded as one of the prerequisites for developing a concept of public or publicity, and as an important influence on the Enlightenment, as well as culture, politics, and society in general. In the 18th century, the Hamburgischer Korrespondent was one of the newspapers that reflected and illustrated the social, cultural, and political changes. It was founded in Schiffbeck, an outskirt of Hamburg, in the year 1712 under the name Der Holsteinische Unparteiische Korrespondente. Especially from 1731 on, when Georg Christian Grund started publishing the newspaper directly from Hamburg, it became the most distributed and the most popular newspaper in the German-speaking area. The then called Staats- und Gelehrte-Zeitung des Hamburgischen Unparteiischen Korrespondenten was known for its objective, factual, and trustworthy reporting. It employed its own experienced correspondents in different capitals all over Europe, who sent their news to Hamburg on a regular basis. Furthermore, the editors succeeded in establishing the Gelehrte Artikel, which can be seen as a preform of the modern feuilleton. This new journalistic text type became very popular and was one further reason why the Korrespondent became that successful. Thanks to detailed research about the historical press, we know a lot about the newspaper's content, about the different groups of readers, about where and how the papers were distributed, and also about the great impact on culture and society. However, we still know little about the language of newspapers, especially in the 18th century. We still only have a vague knowledge about how the language developed on a lexical, syntactic, and a functional level. We still know little about whether there were newspaper-specific verbalizations, if certain strategies or traditions of wording were passed on, or if new ones were developed during the 18th century. Considering the different types of text in the newspapers, it would be beneficial to examine the development of the various forms of political and non-political reports. In addition, we need insight into the origin of text types that are part of the established spectrum in our newspapers today. In this video, these and further research questions shall be discussed. In the project Full Text Digitalization of the Hamburgischer Korrespondent and its early versions from 1712 to 1848, a total amount of 212 issues of the newspaper were both digitalized and annotated linguistically. The corpus can be accessed freely via the Deutsche Textarchiv, which is a reference corpus for New High German. Thanks to the detailed text annotation with POS tags, macrostructural text annotations, normalized spelling, and many more, the Korrespondent corpus is highly qualified as a text source scientists from various disciplines can use. The user is able to work with precise inquiries, which makes research easier, more precise, and more efficient. The Hamburgische Korrespondent was a political newspaper, and thus focused its attention on reports about political and military events and wars. Single articles had headlines like "About the Swiss Troubles," "About the Rhine War," or "From the Dutch War," and such like. A couple of years later, it became a habit to give every single article a place and dateline that indicated the correspondent's place and time of text production. Usually, a single article consisted of many small articles with different topics. In the early years, these different articles were only visually separated by blanks. Later, like in this issue from 1789, editors used breaks or indentations to separate different articles and to structure the text for the reader. The Gelehrte Artikel and the advertisement section were two other rubrics that were developed during the 18th century. Both were commonly printed on the last pages of the particular issue. The space for the Gelehrte Artikel and the advertisements changed from issue to issue. Some issues even had special supplements when there was too much material to print. The spectrum of topics for advertisements increased along with the frequency of their publication. In the first half of the 18th century, typical advertisements were official curatorial announcements, event announcements, early forms of marketing, and literature ads, lottery announcements, or job ads. After 1750, we can also find obituary notices, announcements of births and weddings, apartment offerings, and different economic advertisements. Taking a look at the marketing or commercial advertisements, we can see a process of diversification throughout the century. People and companies not only promoted their products, but they also started promoting services like counseling or stock trading. Even though there are great linguistic differences between the newspaper rubrics and their text types, we still want to elaborate on some of the general changes in short form. A detailed examination of the text material showed that the percentage of the French vocabulary decreased during the course of the century. Verbs ending in ieren, like divertieren, komplimentieren, or arrivieren, were used less and less and were replaced by alternative German expressions around 1750. Moreover, numerous foreign words were assimilated grammatically. Attacke became Attacke, Truppe became Truppe, and Affäre changed to Affäre. This exemplifies the language puristic demands of the 18th century savants. Language purism worked up to a climax with Joachim Heinrich Campe's Dictionary of the German Language from the year 1807. Campe claimed a pure German language that was supposed to be free from the Latin and French influence. In the scientific discourse, the influence of institutionalized language is considered as a central characteristic of early newspaper language. A typical trait of the German chancerelly language, the so-called Kanzleisprachen, is a complex sentence structure. This includes long and difficult nominal groups or the frequent use of prepositions like Kraft, laut, Maßen, Vermöge, and so on. The chancerelly language especially influenced the correspondent on a lexical level. Words with the prefix al are very frequent. That is, for example, the relative pronoun alwo or adverbs like alda and alhier. Certain words with a suffix o can also be viewed as characteristic adaptations of texts produced in chancerelly contexts. For example, anhero, desto, dero, nunmero, anhero, or the form of salutation, iro. Here we can also detect the decrease of use in the second half of the 18th century. If you interpret these and further findings in the context of historical media science, one can conclude that the newspaper's success is linked to processes of linguistic professionalism. At the beginning of the 17th century, newspaper writers adopted strategies and traditions for formulating information from other kinds of text, like the discussed chancerelly texts. With the further development of the whole media system, old and new journalistic patterns were established in order to realize repeating speech acts in the newspaper. A typical reporting article contains speech acts like name the source of an information, inform the reader about place and time of the reported event, mark indirect and direct speech as such, and so on. For these frequent speech acts, writers established certain patterns of wording that became part of the journalistic style over the time. As a consequence, old and non-practical phrases and wording traditions were replaced by new ones, and the newspaper became, from a linguistic point of view, an independent form of media. Another reason for this global development is the fact that the readership expanded. Since people from the lower population started reading newspapers as well, the publishers tried to make their product more reader-friendly and commonly comprehensible. Some of the linguistic characteristics have a long tradition, as they go back to the preforms of the newspaper, like the Fugger newspapers, flyers, pamphlets, or monthly and yearly published news collections. Thus, a lot of phrases and verbalizations have relatively early become part of the newspaper language. Examples are patterns with which the writer names the source of an information, like it was announced that, we have news that, letters give that, and others. The growing advertisement section from the 18th century also contains prototypical patterns. In order to verbalize the dominant speech act of announcing something publicly, writers use syntactic structures like With this, we publicly announce that, or the form, it's notified that. Besides that, it's also beneficial to take a look at the sentence lengths and differences in sentence structure in earlier and later issues of the Correspondent. This article was printed in issue 27 from the year 1712. It consists of 2 sentences and contains a series of subordinating sentence structures which require a high level of reading competence. The sentences contain many different propositions. Their total amount of words is 44 and 45. This article from the Political Rubric, issue 45, 1848, differs from the first one significantly. The writer uses short sentences and sticks to the principle one sentence, one proposition. There are hardly any compound sentences, and the text is written in a reader-friendly way. With an average of 16.4 words, the sentences are much shorter than the ones in the previous article. This short linguistic analysis indicates that, influenced by the mindset of the Enlightenment, the newspapers turned from a medium for scholars, academics, and the nobility to a medium for the general population. The attempts to also reach the lower population with the help of comprehensive language can also be demonstrated for the 18th century. The complex developments show the close connection between social, cultural, and political processes and the medium newspaper with its language.